Greetings all, D&Disability here. This is a follow-up video to my Being a Blind Player video. And here I'm going to cover a few topics, including the challenges that I have being a visually impaired DM, the coping mechanisms I utilize, what players can do to help, and also some kind of final notes and thoughts about RPG systems and their shortcomings as a whole. Challenges. They're pretty much all the same as the previous video, so I'll link to that at the end of this video, so please go watch that one. Like it while you're at it, because it could use more love. But my first challenge, obviously, is dice problems. To give you an idea or an example, on my left here, the one I'm wiggling, is a regular size d20, and here's the d20 I typically use, right? So obviously problems of reading dice or using dice effectively, and that can be mitigated, of course, but it's nonetheless a challenge. Problem number 2, reading rules and managing rules lookup. With books like this, right? Now you can see me, now you can't, right? Basic fantasy, much like AD&D and first edition D&D, and even second edition, the rules lookup is kind of hell. It's that nothing is in its own category. It's all embedded in block text. And here in the basic fantasy game, the one that I use with my home group, everything is kind of helter-skelter. It's not necessarily laid out the best way, but it's also free, so what do you want? Managing my maps, my terrain, and my mini placement, whether in person or in a visual space, is the next problem. Sometimes when rooms look the same, or if a dungeon layout is, say, mirrored, or something happens, I might get those things mixed up. And reading maps, particularly, can be a problem, and I'll show you that later. That'll come back around in the final thoughts section. Taking notes as a DM can often be a problem as well. I pretty much don't do it. I don't take notes during play. If I do, it'll be during, say, a break, where we take, at least my group takes frequent 5-minute breaks, maybe 1 an hour or so, to get up, stretch our legs, whatever. And in those breaks, I typically take my notes then, but I cannot take them during play. If I do, I have to stop whatever it is I'm doing and jot those down. There's also, as I'm sure you may have noticed with this video, a fair bit of what we would call DM loading time, or at least what my group calls DM loading time, where I have to stop, look something up, look at a piece of material, or find whatever piece of information is being requested, right? Or even find it in my own notes. Just because I've written up my own notes doesn't mean I can immediately lay my hands on whatever it is I'm looking for. Alright, section 2, coping mechanisms. So, what do I do? Well, as you saw, I use large print dice. I prepare my notes using the comment tool, if at all possible. I put any of my notes that I can directly onto the map, usually with the sticky note tool. I rip out all of the monster entries or any specific details that I need and have them right there as well, because going and having to stop and look in the monster manual doesn't work for me. It's too slow, it's too challenging, and it's too draining on my eye. I only have one functioning eye, therefore I must kind of maximize its use. When it comes to older modules in particular, I end up highlighting and sometimes rearranging the text that comes in the block text, this big box text that you see in modules, which is not dissimilar from what other DMs do. But I can't stress enough that for me, this is a necessity. It's not a luxury. Other DMs might be able to open up a module, skim through the text, and pick out the information they need during play. I can't do that. Even if I render those notes separately, I still typically can't do that. I have to keep much of this information. If it's not in my notes, it's in my head. And the taking of notes is simply to put it all in my head. It's an exercise in gross memorization, which leads to games that are 4 to 6 hours long of me regurgitating everything I've memorized, which does mean occasionally I get something wrong. So needless to say, I do not write out dialogue or anything like that. I barely keep any stats or notes on NPCs. All of this is all well and good. However, it all costs time. Incredible amounts of time. If the typical player might spend, say, 2 to 4 hours a week prepping their game, I'm typically spending 4 to 8. I've gotten faster over the years, but all of this prep work for me is mandatory. The nice part is like all DMs, even you sighted ones out there, if you do all of your prep work all at once up front or whatever, then you have weeks and weeks and weeks of player content ready to go, sitting in your back pocket that you already have rolled up and ready to use. The downside is that's great for DMs that can then go back and read their own notes and stuff on the fly. I have to continually refamiliarize and rememorize the content each week. What can you do to help? First things first, this might sound obvious, be patient, right? Don't get angry at your DM if they're like me and they have to look something up. If there is DM loading time, use those moments for crosstalk, use those moments to strategize, use those moments to, at the very least, make sure you have everything you need, or at least have any questions you're going to ask ready to hand. And leading into that, if you have a question on a rule or ruling, look up the rule yourself. I allow my players to have copies of all of the books typically. I might ask them to only use this one or only use that one. For the basic fantasy system, as an example, there is a singular rule book, which is nice, and that's it. You can run the entire game out of that one book, much like Morkborg, much like several other RPG systems. To go along with that, know your stuff. Know how your spells work, know how your abilities work. While systems like Morkborg and Basic Fantasy are light on rules, rulings, and kind of ability crunch, right? They're not typically more than a couple of sentences at most. Still know how they work. Spells, at least in Basic Fantasy, can still be just as chunky as they are in 5e, in 3e, in AD&D, right? So understand how your stuff works, and don't make me look it up for you. A final example for that could just be equipment. If you want to do some shopping, say in a town or during downtime, look up the prices yourself, please, right? You have the information. If you compile a list of items and say, I want to buy blah, 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 and it's all going to cost this much, that's fine. Save me the homework. Save other DMs, even if they're not blind. Save them the effort, right? I actually go so far personally as to cut and paste the section, the items and equipment section, out of the player's handbook into my Discord chat, where I just have it pinned there as a picture to where if they want to go back and look it up, there's the picture. Don't badger me about it. First things first, I want to take a moment to talk about the lack of inclusivity in role-playing games, and particularly in modules. Here's an example of what I mean by lack of inclusivity. This is from Castle Ravenloft. This is Expedition to Castle Ravenloft. And here I'm using my magnifier because I figured you might want to see what it actually looks like for me in my day-to-day use of my own PC. And here, even if I zoom in some, which will help. Okay, here we can see these tiny rooms down here, and this is a gorgeous map. It is by far one of my favorite maps of Ravenloft. It has this great kind of exploded view. This is the kind of thing I'd love to hang on my wall. The only downsides to it is, for me, it's basically useless. Some parts of it are totally illegible. I, as an example, can't read what that is there, or even see if there's anything coherently here. I can see the K18, I can see the K, I think that's a 30, that might be a 50, right down here. I cannot read what that is or what's over here. So these maps are inherently problematic. And this is just a particularly nice version. This isn't even any of the blue and white ones that Wizards of the Coast or in that instance TSR used to do. Now, okay, I'm not just an old grognard. I mean, come on, I'm barely 30. Right? I'm not even 30 yet, actually. So, what else have companies, etc., been doing over the years before 5e, before everything else? Right? Well, part of it was third edition's answer, right? Where they would go in and they'd give you immediately what the PCs see when they enter an area. They give you encounter developments, which I was still stuck basically memorizing as a DM. And then they would end up kind of giving you additional information and even, wrap-ups. But also, they would give you all of the creature statistics all along the side here, which were amazing. And I wouldn't complain about this at all if they did this for everything. And they don't. So scrolling back up here to Castle Ravenloft, as an example, let's look at the Tomb of Strahd. Right? Here we get a lovely, nice, long embedded text description with a note down here about the transportation trap. And that's about it, right? We don't get a close-in view of this room. We don't get a map or a layout or anything like that. And this is true for many of the other areas. Another point on inclusivity isn't just the maps or the adventure layout itself, but also the documents that you are allowed to use. I am bound exclusively to PDF, and not all companies or not all forms or formats are in PDF. Wizards of the Coast, quite infamously, did not like the use of PDFs for their products for a very long time. So, all right. So where does this leave us as DMs, as players with disabilities, etc.? Well, for many, I would think you're going to find yourself thinking that all of the concerns, all of the coping mechanisms, all of the challenges that I voiced earlier in this video, that they are just the same as normies, right? That these are not the same as, that these are not really any different, that these are not struggles that are really kind of worth noting or struggles that really matter. Because so what? All DMs have to take notes. So what? All DMs have to highlight that text and strip stuff out. And all DMs have to, or all DMs these days, like to cut and paste the monsters from the monster manual in, right? Yes, this is true. However, for all of them, that is a luxury. They could still pick up a book and play. They could grab a module, flip through it, read it before the event, take some handwritten notes on some pieces of paper, and have enough to go on, right? I can't. Many other DMs with visual disabilities or disabilities in general can't, right? So the difference here isn't in that, us blind DMs versus us sighted DMs. It's not that we're doing different things. It's that the need to do them is there. So, in short, consider helping your DM out. If you're a DM and you have strategies, coping mechanisms, other problems, or other thoughts that I haven't mentioned here, please put them down below in the comment section. That's what it's for. I love getting responses to my videos. Please leave a like, share it. I'd like to see this channel grow, and I'd like to see more disabled players kind of come together and create a community, because role-playing games, for as problematic as they are, really do offer an escape, and they are the best entertainment I think we have, bar none.